So my name is Victor Yushenko. I'm a CTO at the company Demand.io. We are an e-commerce tech company and an incubator. Our broad goal is to make e-commerce work better for everyone. Our solutions are customer facing, and because of that, user experience and performance is super important. We are currently using cloud solutions and they work very well for us. I worked in a number of companies and I executed and I managed different infrastructure teams and infrastructure both on-premise and in the cloud. I've executed several migrations from on-premise toward the cloud and just a lot of the system integration migrations as well. Nevertheless, there were a couple of things that were unexpected. Some of it had to do with account provisioning, and some of it related to finding the right level of the support. You really have to kind of make sure that you understand when you partner with a cloud provider, whether it's a big or small one, what kind of relationship you're going to have. Obviously, if you're a big company, you're going to be a significant partner to the cloud company, to the large cloud company, and there's going to be tighter relationship. But if you're a smaller company, the relationship is not going to be as, if you directly go in with the cloud company, the relationship is going to be different. You're going to be a smaller fish in a bigger sea, so to speak, right? And the relationship is going to change because of that. And some of that was somewhat unique. Obviously, it depends on the company, right? So if let's say you, if you're working for the e-commerce company, PCI certification and security is usually super important. Right now, a lot of the cloud providers do support that, but it's something to check. If you are a healthcare company, right, and you have a personal information data related to the patient data, patient records, things like that, then you need to make sure that their HIPAA requirements are met and all those other things. For pretty much any kind, so in security in general, in the broad, is super important. You want to have the conversation and understand how the cloud provider is going to handle security, make sure there's not going to be leakage from the cloud perspective, right? Most of the issues typically come from the software that the company using the cloud provider would have, right? So that's a bigger issue than the cloud, but still something that's important to check. Scalability is very important, and scalability can mean different things. When people talk about scalability, it depends on what kind of architecture they have. So there is an older style of architecture that's really designed to run on a single system sometimes, right? And then you want to find as big of a system as you can. And then the question becomes, well, how big of a single system can you give me? How much can we grow into it? Maybe you don't want to get the biggest system right away to manage your cost, but you need to find out what can you then migrate toward to and how realistic that system would be available. Cost is important, but for a lot of the companies who get in the cloud, they're switching from on-premise solution. If you look at the equally run on-premise solution and the cloud solution, generally speaking, cloud is going to be cheaper. There is a number of factors, right, that play into it. The way the system is set up. When you work with on-cloud solution, you typically get the very large, systems with a lot of redundant subsystems. They're very expensive and they're designed to always run, never to fail, to be constantly on. And then your software doesn't have to worry about any outages or anything. You just put it on and it runs, but it means it's very expensive when it comes to hardware. And then of course, that's just the hardware. Of course, you need to have a bigger stuff to manage it all. You need to upgrade systems. There's constantly security updates that's coming out. Somebody has to stay on top of it, install them, check them. And this whole thing ends up costing quite a bit. And it's an effective way of handling it if you're a smaller company, because it means you have to have somebody on staff, somebody who's really good. Just finding that person alone is going to take a long time. Who is continuously maintaining that system. When you switch to the cloud, it's much more optimized system. First of all, the hardware is typically much less expensive. It doesn't need to be as stable because the whole concept is different. Your software ideally needs to be designed to be able to fail over. If you don't have that software, you need to have a conversation with the cloud provider to maybe have a hybrid model or something as you migrate over it. But the normal ideal cloud architecture is the one where you can tolerate when the system are being shut down unexpectedly, and you can just immediately fall over and switch the load to another healthy system. Because of that, the systems themselves could be cheaper, and it's a much more distributed model. When a cloud provider installs the upgrade, they install on thousands of systems, so it's just more cost effective overall. I know the companies that really loved going with smaller folks because they can get a better price. Some of the bigger folks, when you talk about, you mentioned well-known big names, they often end up being more expensive than the smaller companies. When you work with the smaller companies, they're more flexible. They can, they may be hungrier, and they can give you a better deal at the end of the day. And then if you look at a future set, what exactly do you need out of the cloud provider, right? So the larger companies have a much broader set of products that they can offer, but that a lot of them is not really necessary. It's out there. You might not need it. A, B, whatever is offering, it might not be suboptimal. So maybe it's a solution, but it's not the solution that you need. You'll choose to build something that's very more specific to what you need, and you're going to go that way anyway. So the fact that they offer something that's kind of in the same direction, but not what you need, doesn't really help you. So you have to understand, what do you really need? And then you look at the alternatives, and you can find that you can save sometimes 50% with a smaller provider. Why would you want to spend more, right? You can spend those money on something else. Then it does make sense to go with a smaller one. The other factor that I kind of mentioned before, the support, right, and just the whole relationship. If you work with the larger company, if you have a direct relationship with them, unless you're a very large company, you're talking about Fortune 50 or something of that size, right? If you're a smaller company, you're not going to be a significant revenue source for them, where they really going to invest a lot into that relationship. Versus when you're working with the smaller companies, they're going to treat you much more important to them naturally, right? It all makes sense. So you're going to have a more of the white glove service. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think file systems is one of the more difficult question to answer in general. And different clouds have different solutions. They all have some sort of the solution that works, but you kind of have to figure out what is it that you have, what features does it provide, and what are you willing to switch, and what is the options that you have when you're switching over. So this is the super important conversation to have, and one of the, maybe could be one of the defining aspects of when selecting the cloud provider to go to. Yeah, so cloud definitely makes sense for the most companies. There are some very unique exceptions where you really need the sub-millisecond performance, but that's really unique, and the trade-offs in that type of business is completely different. For practically most of the companies, you have a limited number of resources. So the question is always, where do you allocate as the executive, right, in the company? Where do you allocate those resources? Do you spend 30-40% of those resources try to optimize your hosting and having your own hosting? Or do you spend that toward the user experience and building a better business, right? Really. And often it really makes sense to put that limited resources more toward the business and pick a simpler solution for your hosting, for the maintainability, and that the simpler solution becomes the cloud solution. And quite often it also becomes a cheaper one. In general, right, with any migrations, think about the issues and think about how you're going to monitor and detect them. So when it comes to the issues, what I like to do is to rehearse. Come up with the plan, rehearse it, make sure that you document what issues didn't go well, but don't do the actual migration, just rehearse it, right? Adjust your plan, try it again, and keep trying until you get it right. Migration toward infrastructural migrations are big projects, and it's worth spending that extra time rehearsing it. If you do it well, I've executed migrations without the snag, very large movements, but just by really rehearsing. You're talking about doing it 5-6 times, and every time you make adjustments, figuring out, oh, that didn't work, that we hit a glitch, that would cause another couple of hours downtime that we can't afford. And the last thing I would say is metrics, right? Figure out what business metrics you want to monitor. Everything at the end of the day is about the business, right? So you want to make sure that you don't impact the business. Have the old system in place that you can switch back to. And when you switch toward the, let's say, a cloud system, have those business metrics and just ensure that everything looks good. It's not unique to the cloud, it's just general practices every time you make a large system changes, but it applies to cloud as equally as anything else.